Hi guys, how are we doing today? Legit Vocals here. I'm just here to go over the deck I played in the last Tier 1 MTG Con event. I made it to Final 4 and I was playing Tymna kodama. Funny name I call this deck is Hulk of the East Weavers. I didn't win sadly, but I made top 4. A little bit about myself. I'm Legit Vocals. I just recently started playing online more. I've been playing Magic for about 2 years now. Formats I play is mostly Commander. I play a little bit of Standard. And then I've been playing Commander for about almost 2 whole years now. Because I originally started playing Standard before I played Commander. And then met friends who got me into Commander and really got me interested. My deck, Tymna kodama. An easy way for me to describe this is as a reanimator type deck. Reanimator as in we want to play big things and get them into play for free and bring them back out from the grave. We're mostly mid-range because we have the off chance where we can win really fast. We have the times where we're playing really slow and trying to assemble our pieces. I'll go over my commanders. Tymna the Weaver is a 3-mana Orzhov and 1 colorless, a 2/2 with lifelink, and then at the beginning of my post-combat main phase, for each opponent that lost life that I dealt combat damage to this turn, I can lose a life, draw a card. So she's a good card draw engine in my command zone to help me dig a little bit deeper. The other main makes my combo lines a whole lot easier is Kodama of the East Tree. It's 2 green, 4 colorless. It's a 6/6 with whenever another permanent enters the battlefield, I may put a permanent into play CMC equal to or less than that permanent from my hand with this ability. So if I cast it at 6-drop, I can play another 6-drop or less. And it opens up our combo lines, which I'll get to in a second, and opens up a lot of good interactions in this deck that makes it easier to play nowadays. The main strategy is, as I tried to say, we are a Hulk deck. We revolve around this card called Protean Hulk. Protean Hulk says when it dies, I may search my library for any number of creatures with CMC that equals 6 or less and put them onto the battlefield. So we have multiple ways that we try to put the Hulk onto the board. As I said, we're a reanimator, so we currently run 5 ways to reanimate this. Reanimate itself, 3 enchantments that can bring it back, and life and death, because the death side for 3 mana I can bring it back. Once we get the Protean Hulk on board with any of these reanimation effects, or if we go into the grind game and end up hard casting it, we need one of our 4 sack outlets. We play Visager, Carrion Feeder, Alter, Dementia, and Dark Privilege. We have 1 enchantment, 1 artifact, and 2 creature-based sack outlets. So depending on what the hate pieces are, hopefully we could play around it. Once we sack this Protean Hulk, I like to do a thing called double piling. I like to get a first pile to kind of protect myself, and then get a second pile. So my first line, usually I'll get a Body Snatcher and a Grand Abolisher, because once Grand Abolisher sticks on the board, my opponents no longer can cast anything. So I'm not worried about losing from this point, unless they have like lands, or Mayhem Devils and lands, like people playing fetch lands and Mayhem Devils, they could like start pinging my things and ruin up our plan here. But usually once this pile sticks, we're kind of safe. So what we do is, on the ETB of this Body Snatcher, we sacrifice it to one of our sack outlets again to bring the Protean Hulk back. So then we sacrifice the Protean Hulk again. So we're doing our real Hulk pile underneath the protection of Grand Abolisher. My Hulk pile is a Malira Lesser Mastercore pile. So Lesser Mastercore has persist on it, so whenever it dies, if it didn't have a -1/-1 counter on it, it comes back. So if I sack this, it'd come back with a -1/-1 counter. Malira says my creatures can't get -1/-1 counters. So every time I sack this, it'll just keep coming back because it'll never have that -1/-1 counter on it. And Disciple of All is usually how I win the game. Disciple of All says whenever an artifact is put in the graveyard, I can target an opponent and they will lose a life. So every time I sack this Lesser Mastercore, I'm pinging somebody for 1, and then I keep doing it over and over again until the pot is dead. There is other lines in this deck to get to this Protean Hulk. So even if you can't double Hulk pile like I like to do, you can just go for the Hulk pile if you don't think anybody has anything. So say you have a stack outlet. Another line I play is Academy Rector Pattern Rebirth. So as long as I have another dude besides Academy Rector, we can sack Academy Rector, use its leave the battlefield trigger that we exile it from the graveyard. We'll go get an enchantment, put it into play. The enchantment we're going to put into play is Pattern Rebirth. Pattern Rebirth says enchant creature. When enchant creature dies, I can go put a creature into play from my deck. So we'll put this on a dork or any one of our other dudes, like Tymna if we need to, and then we'll sacrifice that dude, and when that dude gets sacrificed, we'll put the Protean Hulk into play. And then we'll just sacrifice the Protean Hulk and go to our pile this way. Other creatures that make this pile a little bit easier and like our other good reanimate targets is Razaketh and Villas Broker of Blood. Reanimating a Razaketh is really nice because it lets us tutor out our deck. We do play Razaketh lines with Leonic Relic Order and an Animate Dead or something like that, so we can infinitely tutor out our deck and get to the cards we need. But a good, interesting thing this deck can do with Razaketh is if I have a Kodama on board and I reanimate a Razaketh, I will have a trigger to put an 8-drop into play. And holding priority with that, you can sacrifice Kodama or one of your other dudes, go put a Protean Hulk into your hands. Then put the Protean Hulk into play with the Kodama trigger. Now you can sack it to Razaketh and get your pile from there. Villas is kind of the same way. We can kind of like reanimate it, but with reanimating we get to draw 8 cards. So drawing those cards, we can hold priority on the Kodama trigger and then look at the cards we have and hopefully put something into play that'll be good with the Kodama trigger. And that's really our reanimator targets for this deck. If you start assembling your combo pieces in hand, that's where Kodama kind of comes into play, because we can still go get a Protean Hulk, and we can start putting the rest of the pile into play, and then use Kodama's trigger to put the cards that are in our hand in play. So we don't really have to worry about counter magic, because we're just putting it into play. And that's a big thing that this deck is really good at, is putting things into play avoids people countering it and having counter magic. So when we're looking at how do I interact with my minimum stack space, so interacting on the stack with this deck is very slim to none. Usually we're hoping we see 1 or 2 blue players in the deck so they can kind of keep the pot in check. For removal options, we easily play Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, the usual like, hey, get rid of these dudes. I play Swords and Path of Exile and Slaughter Pact. Assassin's Trophy and Abrupt Decay will always be there because of Op Agents, even Mind Sensors, Mayhem Devils. These creatures have to go. These creatures kind of lock me out the game and let us not do our Hulk pile. So having removal spells for those is good. Slaughter Pact is a versatile removal spell. Because say we don't have a sack outlet on board, but we have a Slaughter Pact in hand and a reanimate spell. We can reanimate our Protean Hulk and then Slaughter Pact our own Protean Hulk, which will give us our whole Hulk pile at instant speed. So if you're holding on to it and you just have a Hulk, and everybody's doing a big counter war and you think nobody has anything now you can just kill your Hulk and be like, hey, I'm going to go get my pile in the game here, which is really good. Other interaction I play that's kind of niche is Noxious Revival, because it lets us get back a reanimate or something I need, or if someone tries to Thassa's Oracle out the game and I can remove the Thassa's Oracle and they have no Devotion of Blue, I can at least put 1 card back so then they don't win the game. And then protection spells is Veil Summer Silence. I play these to kind of like protect my own stuff or to go off the turn I need. Or if someone like puts an Adnos in the stack and nobody really has anything, I can throw a Silence out there and be like, sure, you can get your Adnos pile, but you're not going to do anything with it. And that's kind of how we deal with Adnos decks, hopefully. Besides that, we have a good selection of ramp like Carpet of Flowers, but then we play Bighorn Elves, Elves of Deep Shadow, Deathrite Shaman, Arbor Elf, Elvis Mystic, Llanowar Elves, Birds Paradise, Astron. We play 8 elves to kind of ramp us, to let us get up, because we do have a 6-drop commander. Kodama is kind of expensive, and he really opens up a lot of combo lines in our deck, so getting to him or getting to our big cards kind of help us. But one dude in here, Deathray Shaman, is way more versatile than all my other mana dorks, because with this you can need an instant, a sorcery, a creature on somebody's grave. So if somebody's on Hermit Druid lines, you could eat the Thassa's Oracle that goes to the grave, or something like that. Or if they're doing breach lines, as soon as their brain freezes the grave, you can eat the brain freeze. And you can remove their whole line that way. So you have good ways of interacting. This deck does play hate pieces to kind of slow the game down. Since we are mostly mid-range, we're trying to get there. We play Collector Roof, Drainus Magistrates, Aven Mind Sensor, Opposition Agent, Blind Obedience, Deafening Silence, and No Rod. Rule of Law effects like Deafening Silence, our deck plays really well through it as long as we have a Kodama on board, because we can cast one spell and then put something else into play, which kind of snowballs us. We play No Rod and Collector Roof because Dockside is prevalent in this meta, and artifact-based win cons are still there with LED and breach lines, so we need a way to stop them from doing that, because we can win without our artifacts. So we play it to try and slow them down. Same goes for Blind Obedience. Blind Obedience makes it come into play tapped, so it kind of helps us out. So they can't go, hey, Dockside for 8 treasures, but the 8 treasures when they're tapped. The only real artifacts we play to help us get there is Jeweled Lotus, LED, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Chrome Mox, Mox Diamond, Lotus Petal. So the only ones we really care about early is Jeweled Lotus, because that lets us get to Kodama and a fast Tymna. Lets us get our commanders out quicker and cheat them out to play. LED is kind of here for when we go Razakat's loop and when we start sacking dudes and abusing LED. But besides that, we really don't care about our artifacts. Like, our artifacts are just there. Op Agent and Aven Mind Sensor are really good in this meta right now, because if I see a tutor that could possibly get me there or get my opponent there, I can Op Agent and take the tutor, or we can have Aven Mind Sensor and kind of slow them down if it's not in the top 4. Drainith is really strong because there's some decks that need breach lines, they need to cast their stuff, and Drainith says, hey, you can't do that. And he's a 1-3, which is really, really good for this meta. Other utility things that tutors that I kind of play to get this deck going. Survival of Fittest. It's an enchantment that will let us just discard a card, discard a creature, go get a different creature. So we could discard a Protean Hulk, go get another dude. So it lets us discard our big things that we want to reanimate and cheat into play. Finale of Devastation. This lets us go get a creature out of our deck if we have a lot of mana dumped into it. One of our better tutors is Buried Alive. We can put 3 things in the bin. We can usually put a protection piece, one of our big dudes that we think we want to put into play. It's really good. And then the good for standard black tutors, Imp Seal, Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Intent, and Vamp Tutor. The only exception to one of these tutors is Diabolic Intent is also a sack outlet. So if we have a Protean Hulk on board, for some reason, we can go Diabolic Intent, sacking my Protean Hulk is cost. So now we sacked our Protean Hulk, we have a Protean Hulk trigger, and we have a Diabolic Intent trigger. Other tutors that are good mentions are Entomb, probably one of our best ones, because it's 1 mana. It says, hey, go throw this creature in the bin, and it lets us kind of get there a little bit faster. And Line Tutor has a lot of uses in this deck, since we have good artifacts and enchantments we want to hit. 2 of our sack outlets are artifacts and enchantments, Dark Privilege and Altar of Dementia. One's an artifact, one's an enchantment, so we always have a target there. We can go get a Pattern of Rebirth if we already have a sack outlet we want to get there. And then enchantments, we can also get one of our enchantment-based reanimation effects to get there. So Line 2 really has its place. Eldamri's Call is here because if we have mana floating over, we just need 1 dude, or say we have the Kodama trigger on a village or something, we drew the Eldamri's Call. We could be like, hey, 2 mana, put this Protean Hulk in my hand. We'll put a Razaketh in our hands, and then put that into play. And once we put it into play, it kind of lets us snowball off. And then more utility dudes, which we'll go over in our deck. Leona Teleporter. This is for Razaketh's loops, or if there's a enchantment or artifact that's really annoying, a Rule of Law, or a Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace is a really big one in this deck. We can go, hey, ETB, Leona Teleporter will exile the Rest in Peace, and then we'll sacrifice our own Leona Teleporter, so they'll never get their card back, because because they'll leave the battlefield trigger habits before the into the battlefield trigger. Smothering Tide is a good value engine in this deck because with Kodama, every time we make a treasure, we could put a land into play from our hand, which is really good. And since we are playing like Collector Oof and stuff like that, we don't really care about these treasures. We're just letting them sit there. And if somebody ever does remove our hate pieces for artifacts, we have a lot of mana life, which makes all of our big things really good. Sylvan Library is a good card draw engine with Dark Confidant. They both let us look at cards and get cards. And if we have a Villas on board, if Dark Confidant hurts us, that's card draw. Sylvan Library, if we draw the 3, then we'll lose 8 life. That's drawing 8 more cards, which just really snowballs us out. For utility dudes, as I call them, Destiny Spinner makes it so our creatures and enchantments are uncountable. And we have 3 reanimate effects that are enchantments, and then our creatures as in sack outlets, academy rectors. Good creatures that we want to stick on the board. Luris and Eternal Witness kind of do the same thing here. Luris lets us play CMC 2 or less permanents from our grave over and over again. So our Animate Dead enchantments, our Destiny Spinner, our Grand Abolisher, any of our dudes that we would kind of need to stick. Blood Artist is like my secondary like kill you thing, just in case Disciple of All goes away. I can have Blood Artist come into play. And Blood Artist says whenever a creature dies, target player loses a life and I gain a life. So I just drain the pod that way. And my last tech dude that I really play is Skyclave Apparition. This is a 3-mana dude that says ETB, exile target CMC 4 or less permanent. And whenever it leaves the battlefield, people will get a spirit. But we don't care about that. We just want to get the problem card off the board. Opposition agents, even Mind Sensors, Mayhem Devils, Rule of Law, Rest in Peace, things that are stopping us from getting there. Then that's really all we have for like the deck as a whole as being a reanimator deck for Protean Hulk. Decks you want to see in your pod, you at least want to see like 2 blue players, obviously. 2 blue players and like the 4th player can either be like a mid-range deck like you or somebody that can kind of like pose some help, but not fully like stop our game plan. The reason why we at least want to see 2 blue decks in our pod is because if there's only 1 blue deck, they can't answer all 3 players, and we can't interact with them to stop them. So they're able to do everything that they want to do and go off. So we want to have the blue players to keep the other players in check and kind of slow everybody down so we can get there on the back end. Decks we want to avoid is more like 3 Turbo Agnons decks. Like, we don't want to see that because all of them are going to go faster than we are. And we want to make sure like we have a chance at least. So like we hope they hold each other in check, but I doubt it because they're all going to try and go faster than us and try to get there. Anything I wanted, lands in this deck. The only like different land besides shocks and duels and a couple Wooburg lands is Guy's Cradle because we do have a lot of dudes and we want to play them as fast as we can. The only land I'm thinking about considering to add is Castle Garenbreak because for 4 mana we can make 6 green, which could let us play our Kodama or a Protean Hulk or something, cheat someone out for a little bit less mana. If you were looking to pick up like a slower type deck that can still compete with this meta, this is a good deck, in at least my opinion. Tymna Kodama allows you to play Abzan in a way that you can protect yourself and interact a little bit, but you have big swings when it's time to go, and you're not really worried about some things. Another cool thing about Kodama is if you have Academy Rector is a 4-drop, so it's Smothering Tide. So if you have a Destiny Spinner, they can't counter the Smothering Tide. So they couldn't counter the Academy Rector either. But like if they see the Academy Rector, they may want to remove it. When people see Smothering Tide, they're like, oh, it's just a Smothering Tide. So you play the Smothering Tide, and then you just put into play your Academy Rector when you have like a sack outlet or something they're not paying attention to, and then you just win the game on the back end. It's really, really nice, and there's interactions in this deck that most people don't see coming when they underestimate this deck. This deck isn't very hard to play as long as you learn your reanimator lines and then knowing when, based off your pod and board states, when you can go off. that's really all I can really like help you with is if you like the difficulty level of this deck is just it comes down to your knowledge and where you think the pod and the table is at, if you can go for it or not. I've been playing the deck for a couple months now. As soon as Kodama got like released, I was on a weird jank Ikiri Yannick deck, and my friends were like, play this instead. So I started playing this, and I really enjoyed this change. There's no real database for this deck yet. There's no real Discord for this deck yet. It's mostly what I've been testing, and then a friend of mine, Hire, he's also made a list that has a few changes, but we're kind of doing the same thing. My list is called Hulk of the East Weavers. If you look it up on Moxfield, you can always look at it. I'm constantly trying to make changes or test new things out with the deck. Anybody can get there and ask me questions. I plan on attending the February 27th Tier 1 MTG Con, so I hope to see all of you guys there. I hope you guys have a good day, and if this deck interests you, give it a shot.